Chess is a game of strategy and tactics, and mastering key concepts can make all the difference. In this video, we'll be exploring 8 essential ideas that every chess player should know. From basic principles to more advanced strategies, you'll learn how to improve your game and take your chess skills to the next level. The first concept we'll be talking about is initiative and tempo. Initiative in chess is about actively pursuing your plans and putting pressure on your opponent, while tempo is a measure of time in chess, with each move counting as one tempo. Gaining tempo means making moves that force your opponent to respond, which gives you time to develop or advance your plans. So white always has the first move in chess, which also means white has the initiative in chess because white can choose what he or she wants to play, and black is the one that has to respond to white's move. So let's take a look at an example here in the Scandinavian opening. Here, white can play knight to c3. White develops the knight and attacks the queen as well. So black is forced to move the queen away, and then white can develop another piece to gain another tempo. And if black plays a bad move by moving his queen to the wrong square, for example, let's say queen to g5, now white can play either pawn to d4, developing another piece because the bishop will attack the queen, or white can also play knight to f3, again developing the knight, hitting the queen. Black is forced to move the queen, let's say he goes here. Now white plays pawn to d4, developing the pawn and bringing up the bishop. Black retreats the queen, and white now can play a move like knight to b5, creating initiative and threatening to capture the knight and also putting pressure on the c7 pawn. Let's say black retreats his queen all the way to the starting position, and now white can just play bishop to f4, developing another piece and threatening knight takes c7 check on the next move, forking the rook as well. So as you guys can see, by taking the initiative, you control the tempo of the game. This is also a reason why generally you do not want to develop the queen early on in the opening, because the queen can be easily attacked by your opponent's pieces, and you help your opponent by giving them tempos to develop and attack your queen. Concept number 2 is finding and exploiting weaknesses. Identifying weaknesses in your opponent's position is crucial for a successful attack. A weakness can be an unprotected piece, a vulnerable pawn structure, or an exposed king. And in this example, it's currently white to play, and if you take a look at the position, black's pieces are still undeveloped on the back rank. So that is one major weakness, which is undevelopment, and the second weakness is the back rank weakness. Take a moment and pause the video if you'd like to find the best move for white in this position. So white correctly identifies the weakness in black's position and plays the move rook takes f7. White sacrifices the rook because black cannot take the rook, as it would be checkmate on the next move, the queen to d8. So black cannot capture the rook, and he has to try to defend the rook and the pawn at the same time, because rook takes f8 checkmate and queen takes g7 checkmate is coming. Black can try to play a move like queen to c5 check, giving check to the white king and defending the rook at the same time. At first glance, this seems like a good move. However, white has a brilliant counter with the move knight to e3. White sacrifices his own queen, as black can capture the queen. However, that would leave the rook unprotected, and white can just play rook takes f8 checkmate. So here, it's already lost for black because black's queen is under attack. The rook is under attack too if the queen moves away from this diagonal, and at the same time, white is also threatening queen takes g7 checkmate. So in order to try and survive this position, black has to try and play rook to g8, saving the rook and protecting the g7 pawn at the same time. Now, white plays knight to e7, attacking the rook on g8. The rook can never leave because it's tied down, defending the g7 pawn. Now black can try to play a move like bishop to e6, offering a trade of rooks, because if white captures the rook on g8, black can just capture back the rook on f7. So in this position, white finds a brilliant checkmate in 2 moves, which is knight to g6 check, and after captures, queen to h4 is checkmate. So white correctly identifies the back rank weakness of black's position and exploits it by playing the first move rook to f7. Next, we'll be discussing about pawn breaks. Pawn breaks are pawn moves that challenge your opponent's pawn structure and potentially open up the position. Properly timed pawn breaks can increase mobility and open lines for your pieces. A very typical pawn break occurs in the French defense. And here in the advanced variation, black will play pawn to c5 all of the time. The idea is black puts pressure on the d4 pawn, and if white captures the pawn on c5, now that helps black to recapture with the bishop, which develops the black bishop, or black can even play a move like knight to c6, attacking the e5 pawn now that there's no more pawn on d4 to protect it. So usually white will play pawn to c3, trying to support its center pawn. And later on in the French advanced variation, the trade of the center pawns will come, and then with ideas of knight to c6, queen to b6, and knight e7, knight f5, and all three pieces puts tremendous pressure on the d4 pawn. Similarly, in the Tarrasch variation of the French defense, this is one of the main line in this position, and again we have the c5 pawn break, trying to undermine the center pawn on d4. After c3 and a couple of theory moves, now black captures the pawn on d4 and adds in another additional pawn break with pawn to f6. So now that the d4 pawn was undermined in the previous move, now black plays pawn to f6 to attack the e5 pawn as well. And after captures, this helps black to develop his knight and put it on a nice square on f6, and also it frees up the black's bishop to go to d6 to obtain this nice diagonal. It's also important to note that pawn breaks not only occur in the opening and the middle game, but pawn breaks can also happen in the endgame. Now this is a very famous king and pawn endgame which some of you might be familiar with. Even though it looks like the pieces are equal in material, 3 pawns versus 3 pawns over here, this position is actually completely winning for white because white's pawn has marched up forward, whereas black's pawns are still on the starting rank. So how does white win in this position? First, you have to play the move pawn to b6. The whole idea of this move is after, let's say, black captures with the a pawn, white do not capture back any of the pawns, but instead sacrifices yet another pawn with pawn to c6. The whole idea being, after captures, white will just march down the pawn to promote into a queen. And if you play a move like this, you're not in time because after captures, white queens as well. So after you capture the pawn here, white will just march the pawn forward and black is not in time to queen because white queens way faster. Similarly, if black captures with the c pawn, now the a pawns becomes the sacrifice to make way for the c pawn to queen in the next 2 moves. But before we dive into the deeper and more advanced concepts, I would like to take a moment to remind you to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel if you're finding this video helpful. Your support motivates us to keep creating amazing chess content for you. Now let's move on to the 4th concept that we'll be discussing, which is counterblow. A counterblow is a surprising move or combination that turns the tables on your opponent, shifting the momentum in your favor. Counterblows can be especially effective when your opponent is attacking, as you can catch them off guard. So, for example, in this position, black has a number of threats on the white's position. The bishop on g4 pins the knight to the queen, and the pawn on d4 is under attack as well. Also, black can play a move like pawn to e4 on the next move as well, utilizing the pin to win the knight on f3. So in this critical position, white plays bishop to c4, developing the bishop and also attacking the queen on d5. Now here, black plays bishop takes f3, ignoring the threat on the queen, but black captures the knight and attacks the white's queen at the same time. And now instead of recapturing back the bishop on f3, white starts his counter blow by playing queen to b3, doubling down on this foul, moving the queen out of danger, and also the black queen is still under attack on d5. Here, black has few options. He can retreat his queen back this way, bringing his queen out of danger and protecting the f7 pawn. However, here after a move like knight takes f3, if black tries to play knight to a5, forking the queen and the bishop, white has a really nice tactic with bishop takes f7 check in this position, because after queen takes, queen to b5 check, the queen checks the king, hits the knight at the same time. If black retreats the knight, white can just capture the pawn, and it's another double attack on the black's pieces. And if black blocks the check with the pawn to c6, white can just capture the knight on a5, and overall white will be up a pawn. Therefore, instead of retreating his queen, black finds a counter blow of his own with knight to a5. Now black is saying, if you take my queen, I will take your queen as well, and my knight would be attacking your rook, will be attacking your knight, and your bishop on d5 is under attack by my bishop as well, and also your pawn on g2. And if white were to play a move like bishop capture here, black can just capture the pawn on g2, and now black is the one that's up a pawn. Therefore, white plays a really nice in-between move with queen to a4 check here, getting out of the knight's attack and giving check to the black's king. Black's queen is under attack as well, so he has to play queen to d7, trying to block the check and protecting his own queen. However, now white finds another brilliant counter blow with bishop takes f7 check. The whole idea being white utilizes this pin, as black cannot capture the bishop because the queen would be hanging and under attack. So black is forced to move his king to the side, and now after a queen trades, white just capture back the bishop on f3, and he's a whole pawn up, and white's position is way better because white has the double bishops, and white's king can castle safely on the next move as well, whereas black's king is stuck at the center. The next concept we'll be talking about is prophylaxis. Prophylaxis is the practice of preventing your opponent's plans and ideas before they become a threat, and we can achieve this by identifying your opponent's intentions and stopping them. So the easiest way to figure out what your opponent's plans or try to figure out what they're going to do on the next move is to try to put ourselves in the opponent's shoes. So for example, in this position, it is actually black to move, but if we want to figure out what is white's next move and try to foresee the future, we can put ourselves in white's shoes. So let's take a look at this position. Most of white's pieces are ideally placed besides this knight over here. Of course, white can play a move like queen to d5 check, but black can just hide the king at the side, and white's c2 pawn is under attack. Similarly, white cannot capture the pawn on d6 because the pawn on c2 is under attack, and black can just capture with check. So an idea for white in this position would be to improve the position of this knight, and the easiest way to do so is by playing knight to c3 followed by knight to d5, where white's knight on d5 gains a strong outpost and it becomes quite a strong monster because it has several threats with this amazing knight on d5. So as black, when we identified that our opponent's plan might be to develop the knight and try to put it on a better position, we can prevent that by playing a move like pawn to b4, taking away the c3 square from the knight. Now white can play a move like queen b3 check of course, and attacking the pawn as well, but again we just have to move the king to the side. White can never capture the pawn because the c2 pawn is under attack again. So if white still wants to develop the knight, the only way he can improve the position of his knight is to play knight to c1 here in this position, because since the c3 square is taken away, and maybe play knight b3 on the next move. And now after a simple move like bishop to e6, protecting the pawn on d6, activating the bishop, the computer gives black as slightly better in this position because black has the double bishops, and the bishop threat on a2 might become a potential attack in the future, along with the threat of queen takes c2. Concept number 6 is more advanced, and it's called the principle of two weaknesses. Exploiting two weaknesses in your opponent's position increases your chances of winning. First, you have to create or identify a weakness in your opponent's position, and then while your opponent is busy defending the first weakness, try to create a second weakness to divide their attention. By attacking multiple weaknesses at the same time, you put your opponent under pressure and making it way more difficult for them to find accurate defensive moves. So let's take a look at this example. In this position, it's white to play, and white is attacking the pawn on a6 here. The pawn on a6 is the first weakness in black's position, as both the rooks are tied down to the defend to the defense of the pawn on a6. Of course, white can play a move like bishop to d3 to try and bring another attacker to attack the pawn on a6. However, black can just defend with something like queen to c8, defending the pawn as well. So if we follow the concept of the principle of two weakness, we have to try and find or create another weakness in black's position in order to increase our chances of winning. Because now that black is tied down, black's rooks are tied down to the defense of the a6 pawn, we should try to look and create weakness on the other side of the board. And here, white finds a move, a really nice move, pawn to h4. The whole idea of this move is to advance to h5 and soften up the black's position. Later on, white can also swing his rook over, rook to h1, and controlling the h file, and the queen can rotate to the h file as well. It's not as easy for black to move his rooks over across the board because, as mentioned, the rooks are tied down to the defense of this first weakness. So if white manages to create a second weakness on this g6 pawn or along the h file, white's chances of winning would be significantly higher. Last but not least, we'll be combining concept number 7 and concept number 8 together, which is square control and imbalances. Square control is about identifying and controlling critical squares on the board. Control of key squares provides you with more space, increases your piece mobility, limits your opponent's options, and also create chances for you to attack. Imbalances in a position, such as differences in material, pawn structure, or piece activity, can be exploited to create winning chances as well. So, for example, in this position, the square control for both white and black differs because of the opposite color bishops. White has a dark square bishop, so it's really clear that white controls this diagonal along here and black controls this diagonal along here. Because the bishops are opposite colored in nature, they will never be able to contest and oppose one another. So white should look to attack along the dark squares and utilize this powerful bishop, and black should do the same as well. And if you look at material imbalances, white is actually down a knight for a rook and also one pawn down. So as white in this position, we definitely do not want to contest black along the e file because black has two rooks. Instead, we would want to try to look for threats, checks, or attacks with the knight here on e4 because black doesn't have a knight. And so in this position, actually, white has a forced checkmate in a few moves, as you guys can see on the evaluation bar over here, which shows mate in 4 moves. So pause the video for a while if you like to find the checkmate. So the first move starts with knight to f6 check. The knight hits the king, hits the queen, and the rook at the same time. So black is forced to capture the knight, and after rook to g3 check, the king only has one move to hide in the corner, and bishop takes f6 is checkmate. So as mentioned earlier, white fully utilizes the dark squares, the power of the dark square with the bishop, and white does not contest black's rook on the e file at all due to the material imbalance and finds this nice checkmate. So recognizing imbalances and using them to your advantage is a key success in chess. And that's all for today's video. Thanks for tuning in to our video on the 8 essential chess concepts every player should know. We covered a lot of ground today, from initiative and tempo to imbalances. We hope you found this video helpful in improving your game, and if you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more chess content. In the comments below, let us know which concept you found most valuable or which one was your favorite. Thanks for watching, and we see you in the next video.